Welcome back, dear traveler, to another time travel journey. Today we're going back in time and look into the life of one of the most well-known figures in legend, King Arthur. You've likely heard of him, the noble king who wielded Excalibur, ruled over Camelot, and led the Knights of the Round Table. Tonight we'll unravel not just the legendary King Arthur, but the mystery surrounding his origins. Who was Arthur? Was he a real historical figure, or simply a myth woven into the fabric of British folklore? And what is it about his story that continues to captivate us? As we unravel the mystery of King Arthur, it's important to remember that much of what we explore tonight is drawn from legend rather than historical fact. While some believe Arthur may have roots in real history, the tales we hear today are a large part of British folklore and should be viewed as part of that legendary tradition. So sit back, relax, and let's turn the pages to Avalon, where history meets legend and the story of King Arthur begins. To understand King Arthur, we need to go back to the world he might have lived in, a world on the edge of collapse. The Romano-British period was a time when the last remnants of the Roman Empire were slowly disappearing from Britain. For centuries, the Romans had brought order, technology, and military protection to the island, building roads, cities, and walls that helped keep invaders at bay. But by the early 5th century, the empire was stretched too thin, and the legions that had guarded Britain for so long were called back to defend Rome itself. With the Romans gone, Britain was left vulnerable. This vacuum of power gave rise to the Saxon invasions, raiders and settlers from what is now Germany and Denmark, who saw an opportunity to carve out a new life in this weakened land. For the people of Britain, these invasions weren't just military attacks, they were the end of a way of life. Roman towns were abandoned, trade routes collapsed, and chaos spread. Local warlords emerged, trying to protect their lands and people, but the Saxons were relentless. Now, this is where the legend of Arthur might have its roots. The story of Arthur's 12 battles, as mentioned in the early Welsh texts, could be a reflection of the real-life struggles between the native Britons and the invading Saxons. The most famous of these battles is the Battle of Badon, where Arthur supposedly led the Britons to a decisive victory, halting the Saxon advance for a generation. But who could Arthur have been? There are a few possibilities. One candidate is Ambrosius Aurelianus, a Romano-British leader mentioned by the monk Gildas, who described him as a powerful figure leading the resistance against the Saxons. He's one of the few historical figures from this time whose name has survived, and some scholars think he might be the inspiration for the Arthurian legend. Then there's Lucius Artorius Castus, a Roman military commander from an earlier period, whose name Artorius bears a striking resemblance to Arthur. Some believe that the story of a Roman general fighting barbarian invaders may have been passed down through generations, blending fact with myth until it became the Arthur we know today. It's also possible that Arthur isn't based on a single person at all. His legend could be a composite, a mix of several historical figures whose deeds were merged together over time. In a land full of warlords and battles, the need for a heroic leader to emerge, whether real or imagined, was strong. Arthur may have become that figure, standing as a symbol of hope and resistance against overwhelming odds. But here's the challenge. There's little solid historical evidence that can tell us definitively whether Arthur existed. What we do have are early Welsh texts and later medieval romances that bring him to life. This is why it's hard to separate fact from fiction. What's clear is that the Arthurian legend, whether grounded in history or myth, reflects a time of survival and struggle. It's a story born out of a period when the people of Britain were fighting not just to defend their land, but to hold on to their way of life. Now that we've set the stage with the historical backdrop, let's turn the page to Arthur's origins, a tale filled with mystery, magic, and royal intrigue. According to legend, Arthur was born to Uther Pendragon, a powerful and ambitious king, and Igraine, the wife of the Duke of Cornwall. The story of Arthur's conception is one of the most magical parts of his legend. Legends tell that Arthur's birth was surrounded by mystical events, with Merlin's guidance playing a pivotal role. From this union, Arthur was born, but his birth came with a prophecy, one that would shape his life and Britain's future. Merlin, a figure often shrouded in myth, played a crucial role in Arthur's birth. Some say Merlin foresaw that Arthur was destined for greatness, but also for conflict. To protect him, Merlin advised that the infant Arthur be taken away from his parents and raised in secret. So, while Arthur's true lineage was royal, he was sent to live with Sir Ector, a nobleman far removed from the dangers of court politics. Arthur grew up unaware of his royal blood, living a simple life under the care of Sir Ector and his son Kay. Unlike the stories of princes born in castles, surrounded by wealth and power, Arthur's upbringing was far more humble. Raised in the countryside, Arthur learned not just the skills of nobility, but also the values of honor, humility, and hard work. It was these early experiences, growing up away from courtly life, that shaped Arthur into the man who would one day lead a kingdom. Arthur's hidden upbringing is significant in the legend because it paints him as a man of the people, someone who knew what it was like to live outside the walls of power, to grow up without privilege, and to understand the struggles of ordinary people. In many ways, this mirrors the idea that he was a once and future king, a leader who could rise from obscurity to greatness, and perhaps return again in Britain's time of need. But this part of Arthur's life also raises interesting questions about his origins. If Arthur was based on a real historical figure, could he have been a war leader or a Roman British chieftain who was raised far from the traditional centers of power? Some speculate that his tale of being hidden away as a child might reflect a historical leader who came from humble beginnings, rising to prominence during a time of war and upheaval. Merlin's role in Arthur's birth adds another layer of myth to the story. In early versions of the tale, Merlin was not always directly tied to Arthur, but as the legend grew, Merlin became the guiding figure behind Arthur's rise to power. He is often depicted as a prophet and magician, a figure who could see the future and manipulate events to ensure that Arthur would fulfill his destiny. Whether Merlin represents ancient Celtic traditions of druids or is a purely literary creation, his presence in Arthur's early life adds a mystical dimension that separates Arthur from ordinary kings. As we leave Arthur's early years behind, we see a young man growing up with no knowledge of his royal blood or the weight of the future that awaited him. His humble beginnings set the stage for one of the most famous moments in his story, the moment when he would claim his place as the true king of Britain. Arthur's journey to kingship is one of the most iconic moments in his legend, and it begins with a sword not just any man could pull from stone. The legend tells us that Excalibur, The legendary sword of King Arthur was trapped in a stone or sometimes an anvil, waiting for the rightful king to claim it. As Britain faced turmoil and uncertainty, many lords and knights tried to pull the sword from the stone, but none succeeded. It was said that only the true King of Britain could free the blade. Arthur, still unaware of his royal heritage, stumbled upon the sword quite by accident. He was just a young squire, assisting his foster brother, Sir Kay, at a tournament. When Kay's sword went missing, Arthur found himself in a desperate search for a replacement. That's when he saw the sword in the stone, gleaming and untouched. Without a second thought, Arthur pulled the sword free, unaware of the significance of his action. Word quickly spread, and the knights and lords who had failed to remove the sword were in disbelief. But the act could not be undone. Arthur was the chosen one, the true king of Britain. With the sword in hand, Arthur was crowned as the rightful king, and his reign began. His first act was to establish his court at Camelot, a symbol of justice, equality, and chivalry. Camelot wasn't just a place. It was an idea, a vision of a kingdom where knights lived by a code of honor and served a higher purpose. Under Arthur's rule, Camelot became the heart of Britain, a beacon of hope and unity in a land that had long been divided by war and strife. Arthur's early reign wasn't without its challenges, though. Establishing order in a land still recovering from war required wisdom and strength. But through his ideals of justice and chivalry, Arthur's court quickly gained a reputation for being a place where both the powerful and the powerless could find refuge. His vision for Camelot was not just about military might, but about creating a kingdom based on values that would inspire countless generations. Though the sword had made him king, it was Arthur's heart and his vision that made him a true leader. His reign at Camelot, still in its early days, would set the stage for the legendary knights and quests that would soon follow. No story of King Arthur would be complete without mentioning his Knights of the Round Table. These knights were more than just warriors. They were the embodiment of Arthur's vision for a just and honorable kingdom, men bound by a code of chivalry, loyalty, and equality. The Round Table itself was no ordinary piece of furniture. It symbolized Arthur's belief in equality among his knights, who served the king and the kingdom as brothers. But the knights themselves are just as legendary as the table they sat at. Among them, Sir Lancelot stands out as one of the most renowned. Known for his incredible bravery and skill in battle, Lancelot was considered Arthur's closest companion. Yet his story is a tragic one. His conflict with Queen Guinevere would eventually fracture the unity of the Round Table and bring turmoil to Camelot. Lancelot's loyalty to Arthur was unquestionable, but his love for Guinevere placed him at the center of a conflict that would haunt the king and his court. Then there's Sir Gawain, a figure often associated with loyalty and honor. Gawain was Arthur's nephew and one of his most trusted knights. His tales include battles and quests, but his encounter with the mysterious Green Knight is one of the most famous adventures. In this tale, Gawain's bravery is tested not by force, but by his ability to uphold the values of truth and chivalry. The Green Knight, a strange and supernatural figure, challenges Gawain not only physically but morally, forcing him to confront his own humanity and flaws. Sir Galahad, Another iconic figure is remembered as the purest of Arthur's knights. His role in the quest for the Holy Grail, one of the most sacred and difficult missions, secured his place in the legend. It was said that only a knight of pure heart could find the Grail, and Galahad, with his unwavering faith and virtue, was the one destined to complete the quest. This journey wasn't just about finding a religious artifact, it was a test of the knight's spiritual and moral worth. For Arthur's knights, the Grail symbolized the ultimate achievement, something far greater than the glory in battle. Sir Percival, another key figure in the Grail quest, brings a different story. Though inexperienced and somewhat naive when he began his journey, Percival's character grew over time. His innocence and determination allowed him to come close to achieving what many knights could not, catching a glimpse of the Grail and realizing its deeper spiritual significance. Arthur's reign is often remembered for its legendary battles and quests, but it was also marked by his efforts to bring peace, stability, and justice to a Britain that had been torn apart by years of war. The king who pulled the sword from the stone wasn't content with merely wearing a crown. He wanted to create a kingdom where both law and order could thrive. However, this dream wouldn't be achieved without struggle. Arthur's reign was defined by a series of legendary battles, each more important than the last. Arthur's military leadership is said to have been proven through 12 great battles, as detailed in early texts like the Historia Brittonum. These battles were fought against the invading Saxons who were slowly advancing into Britain, threatening to overrun the native Romano-British population. While the exact locations and details of these battles remain shrouded in mystery, their symbolic importance cannot be understated. The most significant of these battles was the Battle of Badon, a legendary confrontation in which Arthur is said to have turned the tide of the Saxon invasion. At Badon, Arthur led his forces to a decisive victory, halting the Saxon advance for decades. This battle became a cornerstone of Arthur's legend, symbolizing his role as the protector of Britain. Though historians debate whether the battle really took place or if Arthur himself was truly involved, the myth of Badon has endured through the ages as a symbol of hope. Though historians debate whether the battle really took place or if Arthur himself was truly involved, the myth of Badon has endured through the ages as a symbol of hope in a time of great uncertainty. What's particularly fascinating is that Arthur is not always depicted as a king in these early accounts. In some stories, he's more of a dux bellorum, or war leader, rather than a traditional monarch. This depiction might reflect a more historical version of Arthur, a leader who emerged during a chaotic period when warlords and military commanders, not kings, held real power in defending Britain from invaders. His victories in these 12 battles established him as a legendary figure, but it was the victory at Badon that solidified his place as a defender of Britain. While Arthur's military prowess is central to his legend, his role as a just ruler is equally important. Once the Saxons were pushed back, Arthur focused on bringing law and order to his realm. The Britain Arthur inherited was fractured, with warring factions and unstable leadership. Through the establishment of Camelot, Arthur created a symbol of unity and peace, a place where justice was upheld and disputes were settled fairly. Arthur's court was known for its sense of chivalry and fairness, and he sought to extend these principles beyond Camelot's walls. Under Arthur's reign, laws were established to protect the weak and uphold justice for all, regardless of status. In this sense, Arthur's rule was about more than just power. It was about creating a kingdom where the ideals of equality and fairness were not just spoken about, but actively practiced. One of the most important aspects of Arthur's governance was the Code of Chivalry, which guided not only the behavior of the knights, but also the structure of his kingdom. The code emphasized loyalty, bravery, honor, and respect for others, values that Arthur tried to instill across his realm. Through this code, Arthur hoped to build a society that valued peace over conflict, justice over might. Arthur's reign is often seen as the golden age of Britain, a time when the country was united under a just and powerful king. However, as with all legends, this golden age was not without its cracks. The seeds of Camelot's eventual downfall were already being sown during this time, as internal conflicts began to undermine the stability that Arthur had worked so hard to create. But for now, in the early years of his reign, Arthur's vision for a united and just kingdom seemed to be within reach. Even the greatest of kings cannot escape the complexities of personal relationships, and King Arthur was no exception. While his reign is often remembered for its battles and the chivalric ideals of Camelot, Arthur's personal life played a pivotal role in the kingdom's ultimate fate. Arthur's marriage to Guinevere is one of the central relationships in his legend. Guinevere, the beautiful and noble queen, stood by Arthur's side through the early years of his reign. Their marriage symbolized the unity and harmony that Arthur sought to bring to Britain. For a time, their union seemed to represent everything that was right with Camelot, a kingdom built on love, loyalty, and the principles of chivalry. But even from the beginning, there were subtle hints that trouble lay ahead. Some versions of the legend suggest that Guinevere's beauty and grace attracted the attention of Sir Lancelot, Arthur's most trusted and celebrated knight. Their relationship, at first innocent, slowly transformed into something more dangerous. Lancelot, known for his loyalty to Arthur, found himself conflicted between his duty to his king and his deep personal feelings for Guinevere. Their close bond eventually led to tensions in Camelot, contributing to divisions that weakened the unity of the kingdom. Their bond didn't just strain Arthur's marriage, it shattered the trust and loyalty that held the kingdom together. Arthur's role in this difficult situation is often portrayed with a sense of duty and leadership. He cared deeply for Guinevere, but as a king, his primary responsibility was to his kingdom. When the relationship between Lancelot and Guinevere became widely known, Arthur had to take action to maintain stability. Once the situation was revealed, it triggered a series of events that disrupted the unity of Arthur's court. Lancelot, despite being one of the most esteemed knights, had crossed the boundaries of the code of loyalty, and Guinevere's involvement posed a challenge to the kingdom's cohesion. Arthur, caught between his loyalty to his queen and his trusted knight, was left with a hard decision. In some versions of the legend, Guinevere faced serious consequences for her actions, leading to her rescue by Lancelot. This event deepened the divide between Lancelot and Arthur, further destabilizing Camelot. The Knights of Camelot, once united by a shared sense of purpose and honor, were now split into factions, those loyal to Arthur and those who sided with Lancelot. This rift would have far-reaching consequences. The strength of Camelot had always depended on the unity of its knights, and with this unity now fractured, the kingdom began to unravel. In some interpretations, no matter how just and noble a king he was, Arthur could not escape the complexities of love. His dream of a perfect kingdom where knights upheld the highest values and peace reigned was shattered by human weaknesses. It's also important to note that Guinevere's role in the legend evolved over time. In the earliest Welsh tales, she is mentioned only briefly, without the depth or drama that later medieval romances would give her. It wasn't until the 12th century, through writers like Chrétien de Troyes, that Guinevere's relationship with Lancelot took on a central role in the Arthurian saga, becoming a crucial element of the kingdom's downfall. Despite the heartbreak, some versions of the story offer a note of redemption. Following the collapse of Camelot, Guinevere and Lancelot led more quiet lives of reflection, withdrawing from public life as they came to terms with the kingdom's fall. For Arthur, what had happened was not just a tragedy because it involved the two people he cared for most, but because it symbolized the cracks in his kingdom's ideals. The love triangle between Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot is a reminder that even the greatest heroes are vulnerable to the flaws of the human heart. As Arthur's life drew to a close after the Battle of Camlan, the legend of his death took a more mystical turn. Unlike most kings whose deaths are marked by a burial and the end of their reign, Arthur's story leaves us with a mystery. Instead of simply passing away, Arthur is said to have been taken to Avalon, a mysterious and enchanted island where he would not die but instead be healed of his wounds. Mordred, a key figure in Arthurian legend, is often portrayed as a central character in the eventual fall of King Arthur's reign. Depending on the version of the tale, he is either Arthur's nephew or has close familial ties. Mordred's ambition to seize the throne led to deep divisions within the kingdom. This conflict reached its dramatic conclusion at the legendary Battle of Camlan, where both Arthur and Mordred were mortally wounded. In the legend, after Mordred was defeated, Arthur was left gravely wounded on the battlefield. But rather than succumbing to his injuries, Arthur's body was placed on a boat and carried across the waters to Avalon, a place beyond the reach of ordinary men. This part of the legend is one of the most compelling aspects of Arthur's story, because it hints that Arthur's journey wasn't truly over. Unlike other heroes, Arthur's fate wasn't sealed by his death on the battlefield. Instead, he was transported to Avalon, where he would rest in a state of healing, waiting for the moment when he would return to Britain. Avalon has often been associated with Celtic mythology, which speaks of otherworldly places where great heroes are taken to heal, and eventually return to aid their people in times of dire need. For Arthur, Avalon represents this idea, a place where his story continues even after the fall of Camelot. The notion that Arthur would one day return is central to the prophecy of the once and future king. This idea that Arthur could return to save his people gave hope to generations of Britons, especially during times of conflict or national crisis. The prophecy of Arthur's return has its roots in ancient Celtic beliefs about heroes who do not die but instead sleep in a kind of suspended state, ready to be awakened when the time is right. In Arthur's case, this belief has kept his legend alive for centuries, allowing his story to transcend time and remain relevant even in the modern age. Avalon itself has been the subject of much speculation. Some believe that Avalon is a purely mythical place, while others have tried to link it to real locations, such as Glastonbury. In the 12th century, monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have discovered the graves of Arthur and Guinevere, further fueling the legend of Arthur's mysterious fate. However, whether Avalon is a real place or simply a creation of myth, its significance in Arthur's story cannot be denied. As the centuries passed, the legend of King Arthur has not only survived but thrived, inspiring both historians and storytellers to search for the truth behind the myth. Today, archaeological efforts continue to dig into the past, searching for traces of the man who may have inspired this legendary king. Meanwhile, modern literature, film, and media offer new interpretations of Arthur's life, ensuring that his story continues to capture the imagination of each new generation. One of the most intriguing archaeological pursuits lies in the ruins of Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, a site long associated with Arthur's birthplace. Excavations at Tintagel have revealed evidence of a wealthy settlement from the 5th and 6th centuries, the time period traditionally linked with Arthur. Among the finds is an inscribed slate bearing the name Artono, which some believe might be connected to the historical figure behind the Arthurian legend. While the connection remains speculative, the discovery has only deepened the mystery surrounding Arthur's possible existence. Beyond these famous sites, scholars and enthusiasts have scoured the British Isles for any sign of Arthur's existence. From Welsh fortresses to ancient battle sites, the search continues, but conclusive evidence has remained elusive. But even as the historical Arthur eludes us, the modern Arthur has taken on a life of his own. In modern times, Arthur's story is often explored not just as a tale of heroism, but as one of leadership, loyalty, and hurt. Adaptations like Excalibur or the more recent King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, reinterpret the legend with an emphasis on action, mysticism, and the darker, more complicated aspects of Arthur's reign. Arthur's character is often portrayed as a flawed but noble leader, struggling to unite a fractured kingdom, a theme that continues to resonate with audiences today. Television series, fantasy novels, and graphic novels have also reimagined Arthur's story for contemporary audiences. In these modern versions, the focus often shifts to Arthur's knights, Guinevere, or the mystical figure of Merlin, offering fresh perspectives on well-known characters. These reinterpretations keep the story alive, constantly renewing its relevance and appeal. These timeless themes are what have allowed Arthur's legend to endure through the ages, proving that his story, whether based in history or myth, still speaks to the human experience. And so, dear traveler, we have reached our destination for tonight. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life and legend of King Arthur. If you enjoyed exploring this legendary tale as much as I enjoyed sharing it, please consider leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts or any ideas for future time travel adventures. Don't forget to like the video if you found it interesting. But if you're not, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss the next chapter in our journey through history. And if you'd like to support the channel in a more personal way, consider donating through Buy Me a Coffee. I'm more of a tea drinker myself, but every contribution helps bring more historical stories to life. Your support goes 100% into making more videos, so thank you. Until next time, rest well, dream of knights and castles, and remember, history is full of remarkable people and incredible stories waiting to be discovered. Good night.